Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation, Steps to More Equitable and Inclusive Programs, a conversation with SEED Winnipeg. We will begin our presentation in just a moment. If you need audio assistance, we have the GoToWebinar technical support line there on the screen. And if you need to dial in using your phone, you can also do so with the number listed there using the 9-digit access code. If you would like to share questions at any time or comments of interest, we invite you to do so using the question box in the control panel at the side of your screen. We will be joining you today via audio instead of video to conserve bandwidth. We appreciate that everyone joining today is likely also juggling work from home, learning from home, play from home in the same household. So we're trying to be mindful of everyone's bandwidth today as multiple attendees join us. We hope that you'll be able to find the handouts for today's session in the control panel. We have a copy of the slides that you'll be learning from today, so please feel free to download them and peruse them in your own time later or as we go through the presentation. We also have a resource sheet that Louise and Lisa, our speakers today, have shared with more information and more resources that you can look into later. And just in case you aren't able to do any of that today, we will be sharing a copy of slides and a recording of today's session with you later on that you can view later or share with your colleagues or others in the field. So before we begin our presentation, we would like to acknowledge that we are joining you today from Prosper Canada in Toronto, which is situated on traditional territories. The territories include the Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work here in this community on this territory. And we're very honored to be having this discussion with all of you, and we thank you for taking time out of your day to join us from the territories in which you are situated. ABLE is the group bringing this event to you as part of this virtual series. ABLE is a cross-sector community of practice working to reduce poverty through financial empowerment. And we at Prosper Canada are pleased to support the ABLE work. We are a national charity dedicated to expanding economic opportunity for Canadians who are living in poverty through program and policy innovation. This series, this event is our second to last event in our spring series, Recover and Rebuild, helping Canadians build financial security during the pandemic and beyond. We are looking forward to bringing you more events this coming fall, so we encourage you to stay in touch. We have information on our ABLE website and further contact information towards the end of this presentation, so if this is the first event you're joining us for, we certainly hope it won't be the last, and we'll see you again for many events coming up later this year. We'd be remiss not to include great recognition for the sponsors that are helping us bring this event to you today. We are pleased to acknowledge and thank TD, the TD Bank Group, the Intuit Financial Freedom Foundation, Assiniboine Credit Union, Haven Tree Bank, the Canadian Bankers Association, the Duca Impact Lab, PayPal, Coast Capital, and the Financial and Consumer Services Commission of New Brunswick. So thank you to all of our sponsors for making this possible. Before we begin today's session, we would love to know a little bit more about you who are listening in with us today. So we have a couple of poll questions that we'd invite you to answer. And these will all be completely optional, but if you have ideas on where your organization is at in your own journey towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, how would you describe your point of progress on this work? Are you just starting out? Have you started this work already in the last year? Have you been doing this work for several years already? Or you're not sure? So we'll give you another few seconds to offer a response. And there are about 50 of you on the line, so we look forward to hearing from as many of you as we can. So we'll close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So if we can see the results. It looks like about 2/3, 3/4 of you have already started some work in this area, which is just wonderful. And if you're in the just starting out or not sure area, we're just as glad to have you with us today. We hope you'll learn a lot and come away with many ideas on what you can do next. So we have one more question for again, anyone on the line. What aspects of this work would you say you are most curious about? And these are just 4 options. If there's an option not listed here that you're curious about, we encourage you to let us know in the question box. For example, are you most interested in understanding population needs, in data collection practices, in program design practices, or organizational management? Please let us know any of those that apply, or if there's something that you're thinking about that's not listed here, please let us know. All right, we'll close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like there's quite a depth and breadth of interest here today. So Lisa and Louise, I think this tells us that there's quite a lot of interest in a number of the things that you'll be telling us about today. I think you're going to be touching on all of these in some fashion. So that's a good news story for all of us here. And that also tells us that there's a lot more to this story that we can continue to bring learning events for everyone in this area. So thank you everyone for sharing. We'll close our polls, and I apologize for the screen sharing technical difficulties here. But I'm pleased to include our speakers here today. Lisa and Louise are going to introduce themselves and share more about their work with SEED Winnipeg and how they have been working towards equitable and inclusive program design over the last several years. So without any further ado, please take it away, Lisa and Louise.
Great. Thanks so much, Glenna. We're both very pleased to be here. This is Louise, and if you could move to the next slide. I'd like to start by introducing Lisa Forbes. I met Lisa before she started working at SEED, so it would be 20 odd years ago, and we met at a Amnesty International human rights letter writing group, and we were writing, I think, on Peru perhaps, and I just remember how passionate she was about human rights, about justice, and talked about her economics background. And I remember thinking at the time, wouldn't it be great if she could be working with us at SEED? And a few years later, we were able to make her the amazing offer of, why don't you leave your very safe and secure job with the federal government and come to work for a nonprofit organization for less pay, almost no benefits, but doing work that will be very meaningful. And I was absolutely thrilled when she agreed to join us. So Lisa is an amazing addition to our team at SEED, does really incredible work in the community. She's actually featured in some CBC documentaries on the Indigenous Rock the Vote. So she's also a brilliant human rights activist as well. And so just very pleased that she was able to do this presentation with me. Lisa manages our business, our BEST program, so works with low-income entrepreneurs to launch businesses. We'll move to the next slide.
Thanks, Louise. So I'll introduce you to, this is Lisa, and I'll introduce you to Louise. So she's the co-director of SEED Winnipeg, and Louise is, as she said, we met as human rights activists through Amnesty International. She is, she's first of all my friend, my human rights activism colleague, my coworker, and a sister in everything. She's, if I didn't say already, she's my mentor as well. She just has a brilliant brain for engaging community, and she has a great way to look out across what's happening in our field, and she has a brilliant mind for it. Louise is involved in the Police Accountability Coalition, heavily involved in getting people organized in that. Recently, she's also part of the Immigration Matters Coalition, a couple of things she does outside of work. And of course, she's got Bachelor of Commerce in Saskatchewan. She's studied overseas, and over 20 years I've known her, I always get to learn something about CED and about being able to communicate with the community. And so that's my friend Louise. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so you can see SEED's vision is to build a world where opportunities exist for all people. And this is actually from a United Way campaign. This is one of our participants. Her name is Bucky, and she actually accessed a couple of our programs. One was our Access to Benefits program. At that point, she was living in a shelter, and helped her transition to safe housing. But she also accessed our Recognition Counts program for skilled immigrants. She had been trained as a nurse overseas and needed to have her credentials recognized. And I just think she's an amazing example of resilience, but also contributing to the community. At this point, probably the profession that we need more than ever in Manitoba is nurses. And having her contribute to the community in the way that she is, I think really is a great articulation of what SEED is hoping to achieve. Next slide.
Thanks. So who you're looking at here is Riley, and Riley attended one of our financial empowerment programs. We've got him here because he exemplifies an aspect of our mission, that's to build strong communities and increase opportunities through financial empowerment programs. So he attended a program called Money Stories, which is personal financial management training. And then he went on to, and that one is specifically for Indigenous youth. He attended our Train the Trainer program so he could deliver that training to other community members. He, through the asset building match savings program associated with that, he was able to save for a laptop, used it for his education and to find employment. And along with his sister, he has established a youth-focused community organization called Initiative. It feeds people and cleans up Winnipeg's North End, and he's doing a great job here in Winnipeg right now. Next slide, please. So this is our diversity statement. So it says SEED is committed to creating a safe and inclusive space that celebrates the diversity of our community. Just give you a little bit of a background of why we created this statement. So a key aspect of, if there's any Indigenous folks in the audience right now, one of the things in terms of that Indigenous people say, it's one thing to say that something includes everyone, and it's a different thing entirely to actually see that you are included, that it's not, it's for Indigenous people. We often talk about that Indigenous people don't feel, as a Canadian, we feel Indigenous people, but we don't feel we're necessarily included in Canada. So, so we created this to welcome everyone. So, and diversity includes age, gender, disability, size, sexual orientation, religion, race, culture, ethnic background, and source of income. We thought about the different ways that we felt people experience systemic racism and might feel excluded. So in reading this at the start of our programs, it lets people know that we are accountable to them, and it reminds us that that we have to do well for our participants. It's our responsibility to make sure that our participants and all of us are surrounded with respect. So the focus of this presentation will be on equity and inclusion when it comes to Indigenous and racialized or immigrant communities. And yeah, next slide, please. So does your organization have a diversity statement and or policies? If you wouldn't mind actually putting it into the question box. And so first of all, I'm going to take a look at, so the name of the organization, his organization, the word initiative, they use the first part of Anishinaabe. So it's Anishiative, A-N-I-S-H-ative. That's the name of the organization. And we've got a person here that's not able to hear. Jyoti is not able to hear. All right, so do you have a diversity statement or policies? Would you mind writing it in the questions box? And just to say that, okay. No, I'm not seeing any answers in here.
Well, thanks, Lisa. We can always keep encouraging folks to offer their responses as the presentation continues. This may be a good one for folks to continue to think about as you let us know more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
And I also added into the chat that the program that he went through at SEED was called Money Stories, and he also went through our Saving Circle program where he saved for his laptop, and we matched the money that he contributed. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. All right, so I think the title of this session is a little bit of a misnomer because it gives you the impression that there are almost tick boxes and steps that you can take that are sequential around creating equitable and inclusive programming, and it's less of a sequential set of steps and more of a variety of different strategies and approaches that you can use. And the good news is that that you can start anywhere and have an impact. And the more that you work on it along different tracks, the different elements support each other and mutually reinforce each other. A key piece, though, is around tracking progress and having the data to know whether or not you are making progress, and also knowing where you've started. The composition of your staff, of the board, that's important. Building partnerships with organizations that are connected to the communities that you want to serve is also really important. And then engaging in community-led program development, as well as working towards solidarity and systems change. So we're going to touch on all of these different elements. And although our diversity statement that we read to you was really broad, what we're going to focus on in this presentation is our work particularly with Indigenous communities and newcomer immigrant communities, largely racialized. So we'll move to the next slide. So in terms of tracking progress, it's important to track participant demographics in each of the program areas. And it was interesting, Glenn had asked us if we could share some tools, and I thought, okay, it'd be good to share one of our forms. And so Lisa and I were going over the presentation yesterday, and she looked at the form and she goes, "That's not right." In terms of how we've broken out Indigenous communities. And so she said, I'll put up the one that we use in business development service. And I was like, great, because one of the points that we wanted to make is that when you have multiple programs, multiple funders, it's often really challenging to align all of your forms and still be tracking information consistently for internal purposes while meeting the needs of funders. And so she showed me what she had, and I had issues with how it described, and we were tracking information about people that are racialized because it used the term visible minority. And so obviously lots of work to be done. And what I can say is that you'll never actually get it absolutely right because these terms are highly contested. They evolve over time. And you are always sort of straddling the line between something that is absolutely correct and something that can be understood and isn't too onerous by your participants. So you're going to be criticized no matter what. I don't think that should prevent you from starting to try tracking the information. The intent behind what you're doing is what really matters, and the willingness to adapt and change as you get new information to try and make it better is what matters. The other big lesson that we learned is it's really important to track retention at every stage. So initially when SEED started, and definitely part of our DNA, particularly to be inclusive in terms of Indigenous communities, about a third of the people that we served were of Indigenous descent. We thought that was really great until we got a question from one of our partners, which is the credit union, asking about Indigenous community members who had launched businesses. And we had trouble finding any. So we tracked a cohort of a particular intake, and the attrition rate for Indigenous participants was disproportionately high until when they got to the point of launching their businesses, there weren't any left. And so we thought that's a huge problem. And that's where we decided to really focus on Indigenous community collaboration and realize that there was a significant issue. And then the last thing that's really important is tracking through qualitative feedback from participants, from partner organization, frontline staff. That more than anything has shaped what our programs look like. So move to the next slide.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the answers that you put into the question boxes about your diversity statements and anti-racism statements. Thanks so much for sharing. It's really inspiring to see that. And you know, there's always more that you can do, right? So one of the things I'd like to do in our organization is just really have a really clear way so people understand what their rights are in our programs and be able to bring things up. So I really appreciate you bringing this stuff up. Okay, so organizational commitment. So in terms of having ensuring equity, in terms of the main thing that I'd like to focus on here is what we've done with Indigenous programming. But to start off with, we have a commitment to this work. We have lots of people in our organization who came to us through their social justice interest, and it really shows. We have at the very top of our organization, our co-directors champion and represent diversity and inclusion, both themselves. Our board formally adopted the TRC Call to Action 92, which is about it's a call to businesses in terms of educating their employees about Indigenous issues, and also to further to work towards employing Indigenous people and increasing economic opportunities for Indigenous people. So we do acknowledge and work towards addressing systemic racism and barriers to inclusion within SEED. So I find, my opinion, when Louise and I were talking about this, I said, you know, I think we're doing a great job with Indigenous people, but I feel as myself and my own personal commitment that there's more that I need to do about understanding systemic racism in our organization related to people of color, people with disabilities, and people with different gender identities and sexualities. There's just always so much more to do, which to me keeps the work exciting, and I just know that we have so much more to do. I think we're doing a great job, a really outstanding job for Indigenous people, and we'll continue to do a great job, I know, with all the other work we have to do. So our strategic plan, when people ask me about the work that we do, like how do you get to be an organization that does really good work for Indigenous people? And I say, you first of all have to have co-directors that are committed, like they're definitely committed, and they show that commitment throughout the organization. So one of the ways we do is it's actually in our strategic plan, we have a tangible action related to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We continue to develop and strengthen programming tailored to Indigenous and newcomer immigrant communities. That is part of our strategic plan that we're always working on. And we certainly are constantly reporting on how well we're doing with immigrant communities and with Indigenous communities. So next slide, please. So our strategic plan, goal 1, it says to work in partnership with Indigenous community members and organizations to reduce the ongoing impact of colonization by taking action on the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we did, again, when Louise and I were talking about this, when we were doing our strategic planning with the board, if Louise remembers, she can jump in and say how many years ago this was. I feel like 12, 14 or 15 maybe, I don't know how many years ago it was, but we were having a discussion about essentially the discussion was whether or not we wanted to include everybody in one goal, like just say, okay, so diversity inclusion for all, and then name everybody all together: immigrant, newcomer, refugees, communities, Indigenous people, people of color, people with disabilities, and so on. And we were just really adamant about making a goal that was separate and specific for Indigenous community members. And so there it is. That's what it is. And we have lots of actions associated with it. Okay, so when I talk about, thank you, organizational commitment. So staff driven. So in order to, what we do is we have a committee that keeps us accountable to that strategic plan goal. It's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Committee. We have non-Indigenous and Indigenous people across the organization. And again, when people ask me, how do you do this? How do you do such strong commitment to the TRC calls to action? And I say, well, both of our co-directors are on that working committee, and they're working on it all the time. It wasn't assigned to someone else. They're directly working on it. And for something like this, I think it has to come from the top like that. So we have that TRC committee created our specific land acknowledgement that we have. That committee initiated a review by an Indigenous human rights or an Indigenous human resources organization to help us with that. And we also have a cross programs training committee. They do a really great job with all kinds of training for us on newcomer issues, on Indigenous issues. We have lunch and learns. There's a lot of different things that we do. We have at staff meetings, we have some kind of a training. The best training that I had out of one of those meetings was this outstanding teaching on Indigenous views of treaties. I'm a First Nations Métis person, and I had never heard that teaching. It was amazing. So we have external guidance. We have something called Indigenous Programs Advisory Committee with people from the community. We think that we need to figure out ways that this committee can be stronger. We do feel that our consultations that we specifically have with elders, knowledge keepers, and individuals with lived experience, I feel that's very, very strong. We do directly use all of the information that we get. We put it into our programming. So next slide, please.
Okay, thanks so much, Lisa. And I just responded to the question about the tangible actions you can include in your strategic plan. So the answer is in the question and answer chat. And I just included a few examples from our strategic plan, just so you get an idea of what it looks like. So in terms of staff composition, and I'm really conscious of the time because we want to leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to move a little bit quickly through the next few slides. But it is important for us to have people that have lived experience and backgrounds that are reflective of the communities we serve. And that also including former program participants, retaining Indigenous and racialized staff, so offering opportunities for promotion and investment within the organization are all really critical to that. Next slide. The same applies to our board. And so when we go through the nomination process of selecting board members, we look for those same types of qualities. And really important to move beyond tokenism, because I've been asked to be on various boards and committees, and often people don't see beyond my refugee background and assume that I'm really closely connected to the Burundian community and don't really have a sense of what else I might be able to bring to the board. So move to the next slide. And so this is what the nomination committee uses. And so this is from a few years ago. There were a few people retiring from the board, and you can see that they're, the people that are highlighted in yellow were the people that we needed to look at replacing. But the people that identify as Indigenous, immigrant, or racialized are also bringing a number of other attributes. They might have really strong expertise in terms of business, in terms of accounting and finances, in terms of community economic development, in terms of a legal perspective or human resources perspective that we really need on the board. And so they're bringing multiple qualities to the board that are really critical to us. Next slide. So this is an example of someone who is amazing and has contributed in incredible ways. She's a former participant, went through our business development program, launched a tech company called NSD Tech that has actually been featured on a national news program. Nominated as a woman of influence by RBC. Her big thing is she really wants to provide opportunities in tech for other women. And so she places a huge emphasis on employing other women. And incredible, like a Luddite like me who is very technologically deficient. She's been super helpful. Like, she's just very gentle. She's like, well, you guys might want to upgrade your website, and she can help us with that. And so just really been an incredible support to us in lots of different ways. Next slide.
Okay, this one's for me, and I do see some, I will be able to answer your questions when I'm done talking here. I'll write it in, Nina. But okay, so we have a policy. In terms of building partnerships, we have, one of the things we do is we have a policy not to accept Indigenous designated funding. We don't want to be in competition with our Indigenous partners for the types of money that's available to Indigenous organizations. So our community economic development mission, avails us of so many different kinds of funds. We do Indigenous-based programming, but we do it from community economic development calls for proposals and foundations. We don't do it from Indigenous designated funding. That has really helped in terms of our partnerships. And also ultimately what we'd like to do is we're nationally known for our CED mandate, and so we'd like to bring Indigenous organizations to the table to be able to access non-Indigenous CED funds and I'm working with a local organization to do that right now. So securing funding to support the work of Indigenous and ethnocultural community organizations. I just love the people that I work with. We have there's a couple of, we last year transferred over $500,000 to other organizations, the majority of which serve Indigenous and newcomers. We do it through the Family Resource Centers project that we have in terms of asset or ID, so access to benefits work and also financial literacy work. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering. I'll get Louise to say this because I can't remember what ACOMI stands for. Oh, okay. The African Communities of Manitoba.
Incorporated. Right? Yeah, absolutely correct. And, can we move to the next slide?
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Previous slide. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, keep going, Lisa. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. And the Canadian Muslim Women's Institute. So my colleague Millie, they just do some excellent work with helping organizations to get money to do access to benefits, access to tax filing, and access to financial literacy programming. They did a great job.
So was it this slide, Louise?
Yeah, it was, but I was confused about how I'd organized things. So.
Sorry, that was just a couple ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we can go back to where things were. That's okay.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, all right.
So the question is, have you developed or adapted programs for specific demographic groups? And if so, share the details in the question box, please.
Okay.
And
all right.
Do you want to go, Louise?
Should we let a few responses come in?
I'll go, and I'm going to rush us along, Lisa, a little bit.
Go ahead, and I'll answer questions in the question box.
Okay, awesome. All right, yeah, and so one of the key things around working with community groups is not to use a cookie cutter approach. And I can't remember who said this, but it really struck me, one size fits none. And so to be really prepared to adapt our programs or even develop new ones. So next slide. So Lisa talked a little bit about some of the partnerships that we built over the years. And one of the first projects that I think, Lisa, you'd worked on was with the Manitoba Métis Federation, the Aboriginal Build a Business program. We've also worked with the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization in Manitoba, and they really helped us in terms of really thinking about how to work more effectively with newcomer communities. So not going to go into a ton of detail, but the session that Lisa talked about that she found really impactful was delivered by the Manitoba Indigenous Cultural Education Center. The person that leads that center, Adonis, is the one who delivered that session on treaties, and so they're also one of our partners. So move to the next slide. Yeah, and so the idea in terms of developing and adapting our programs, it really does need to be a community-led process. And it also needs to be one where it's not just about us building the capacity of other organizations, it's about them also building our own internal capacity at SEED. And at the end, we're a richer organization because we're better able to serve those demographic groups. Next slide. So this is an example of one program and an incredible community leader, Catherine. She speaks about, I don't know, like 6 or 7 different languages. But we started a project called Strengthening Families in Canada, where we worked with 26 community-based educators from various ethnocultural communities. We adapted the training both in terms of content, but also in terms of translating some of the content into different languages. And so it was delivered in community in 11 different languages, and that's an example of a couple of sections. So the one on the right or on the left is Amharic, and the one on the right is Swahili. But what's really key is the community-based educators essentially acted as cultural brokers and really adapted how they delivered, where they delivered, what they delivered for their specific communities, and they fed that information back to us, and it also shaped our own programming that is directed at those communities going forward. And I'll turn it back to Lisa.
All right, so I'll try to just quickly go through this. So in terms of co-creation of programs, we wanted to mention the Money Stories program. What you're looking at is we go out into the community and do financial management training in community organizations. This was done at the Aboriginal Senior Resource Center. This group of people got that training. When they were taking the training, they said, oh, it'd be great if we got this when we were younger. And then they started talking about telling stories of what they had learned as adults, and that was there a way that this could be done for youth. So we've got the Children of the Earth slide here. So that's the name of high school. It's right beside SEED and First Nations High School. So young people, the Money Stories program now has young people who get the training. These people are learning how to facilitate the training themselves to teach youth. And if you could go to the next slide. And then ultimately what happens is the youth, once the youth gets Money Stories training as a participant, they can participate in train the trainer type of a program. It's a pre-employment skills program. SEED hires these folks. A lot of the folks that you're seeing in this picture are young people who SEED hired during the summer. There's a large cultural component of programming, and so they made all the drums that are here, and they learned songs and to participate in different cultural teachings. That's one of the things they do, plus pre-employment skills, plus financial management skills. So that program has been going for about 10 years, I think, and we've got some people here who've gone on to work at SEED full time. I think we might have another slide for that, so I'm not going to mention it right now. But all right, so this is the thing currently that makes me the proudest and happiest to work at SEED. This is the middle words there in Anishinaabe, Shunya de Bajamoan, which means storytelling about money. So we have a program where there are 3 different in Indigenous languages. The Money Stories program, we worked with some native speakers so the first one is Cree, the second one is Anishinaabe or Ojibwe, and the third one is Oji-Cree. And the people, I'm going to try not to, I almost cry every single time I think about this. It's in Indigenous languages. We had a woman who just said, who mentioned she had been taken away for residential school and how grateful she was to be able to speak her language, that she ended up not losing her language, and to be able to participate in this program and keep language alive. So yeah, next slide, please.
Okay. Yeah, and so I'm also super excited about that program and really looking forward. So far, we've trained 10 people, and I think we just completed a training last week with another, I think, 8 or 10 language speakers, and now they're going to go out into their community and deliver the money stories session in first language. And so I can't wait to see what's going to happen and how that's going to come back and also help transform what happens internally at SEED. So the slide that you're looking at really describes our approach to working with different community organizations, Indigenous-led organizations, Black-led organizations. It needs to be participant-centered, which means really focusing on the needs, the attributes, the capacities, and the priorities of the community members and the community organization. Responsive, holistic, tailored, so customized specifically for those communities and for those organizations, and focus on that mutual capacity building that I talked about. And then on the outer edge are the different pieces that SEED is able to come in and provide supports around in terms of doing that joint program development. So move to the next slide. And then the last piece, which is probably one of the hardest things to get funded, but I think is really critical, is a lot of the work that SEED does is very individually focused. But we know that when we talk about systemic racism, that the way that we address it isn't by focusing on the people that have been harmed only, we need to focus on the systems, and we need to work in solidarity with and amplify the voices and the advocacy efforts of the organizations that are fighting towards systems change, and take collective actions around that. So SEED is a signatory to the Indigenous Accord that was put out by the city of Winnipeg. And so we publicly provide information about what we are doing in terms of living up to the call to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. So another question and something for you to share in the questions or in the chat about the kind of work that your organization does around advocacy or policy. So move to the next slide. So this is just one example that I just recently shared with our board, just to make sure that, with our executive committee, just to make sure that they weren't too nervous about SEED engaging really actively around this. But we've been holding anti-racism letter writing sessions monthly for the last 4 or 5 months. And the most recent one that we held was just incredible. Like we had our priorities all set out, and then there was the discovery of the 215 children at the former residential school in the unmarked grave, and then there was the murder of the Muslim family in London, Ontario. And we, our staff was really rocked by both of those events. It had a profound impact on us, and it was just really great to be able to bring community together to take tangible action that was in line with what community leaders from the impacted communities were asking the general public to do to support them. And so at the letter writing, we had about 50 people attend, and fortunately the executive committee said, yeah, we want you to keep doing this work. This is important. And that's just one example. So in terms of tracking progress, so this is from not the last fiscal year, but the year before that. We're just compiling the stats from this most recent fiscal year. But if you look at our participants, 45% are of Indigenous descent, 29% identify as newcomers or immigrants to Canada, 18% people with disabilities, and 62% women. And then we try and match it in terms of wanting to make sure that our staff is reflective of that, and our board as well. And generally, if you look at these stats, you think, oh, wow, SEED is doing a really, really great job. If you look at it in a more granular way and you think about where those staff are located, I'm really conscious that the majority of the Indigenous staff are located in frontline or administrative positions. And so we really want to figure out how do we change that? How do we ensure that there is equitable representation at all different levels of the organization? And the same applies to the board executive committee, where we just have one Indigenous, someone that's of Indigenous descent that's on the executive committee, and he just recently stepped down. He was our treasurer, and so scrambling to replace him and just really thinking about how do we create that equity internally on the board. Let's move on to the next slide. And so this is the continuum of our programming at SEED, and it's in order of how the programs came to be. So started off with micro enterprise, moved on to match, social enterprise development, and they're also tracked along the continuum of the sustainable livelihoods continuum. So on the one end, you have people that are in more survival crisis mode. On the other hand, you have people that are in more future mode. And part of what we're needing to do is really look at how representative the people that are in those programs are of our community, and recognizing that different people are in different circumstances. And so the evolution of the programming and the introduction of different programs has been an attempt also to reach those communities. So for example, the ID fund, 3/4 of the people that access our identification fund are of Indigenous descent. And if you think about the colonial history of Canada, that's not surprising. When you move to the other end of the spectrum with our matched homebuyers program, there's very, very few Indigenous participants that are part of that program. And part of the long-term goal is to be able to provide stepping stones in terms of our programming, so that eventually someone that maybe starts off in a savings circle program or starts off filing taxes with us ends up purchasing a home maybe 5 or 6 or even 10 years down the road. And I'll just turn it over to Lisa just to talk a little bit about our Indigenous specific programming and immigrant specific programming in our business programs.
Oh, yeah, so on the previous slide there, there's on the continuum in stage 2, we have immigrant, where it says IWEB, immigrant women exploring business and Indigenous women exploring business. Those are 2 different programs that we do. It is this is the first time that we've incorporated the personal financial money management at the beginning of our program, and then we also do small business skills training and business consulting to help people start small businesses. It's just amazing. It's just such a privilege to be part of these programs, and it's really about building relationships and about self-confidence and people sharing their lived experience with each other, and magic happens among these groups, and they are starting businesses, they are going back to school, they are getting better apartments, all kinds of things. So yeah, so those programs happen right now. Okay, so tracking progress. So we have, this is, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have AMIC is an Indigenous human resources organization in Winnipeg. We've been given, they did an audit of how we were handling COVID. Our co-directors initiated, were worried about how Indigenous staff were managing during COVID. So asked about that, about ways that SEED could support them during the pandemic, and then also about hiring and retaining employees and board members, and then also as well, we are trying to retain, mostly retain, because we can get Indigenous people in programs, but about retaining people in programs, especially the ones that involve, I guess, further along on the sustainable livelihoods model, if you know that. Go ahead, Louise.
Yeah, okay. We'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, so getting back to our chart. So we tried to cover examples and some of our initiatives in each one of these areas. But as I mentioned before, each one of these areas is mutually reinforcing. And so the staff composition is a key driver in terms of community-led program development, particularly the staff that are former participants. The partnerships that we build really inform our work around solidarity and systems change, and so on and so on. And I think that's everything that we wanted to present. And you've been asking questions throughout, but just wanted to throw it open in case there were any further questions.
Yeah, thank you, Louise and Lisa. That you've covered many years of work in such a very short amount of time. So much gratitude and thanks for all that you've managed to encompass today. I'm sure we could have easily been here for several hours actually to learn more. So maybe this is part 1 of another that we'll come back to. But yeah, and thank you, Louise and Lisa, both, as you've been responding to questions throughout the session. But if there are other questions you'd like to respond to openly, if you'd like to share both the question and then your response, please feel free to choose from the questions that have come in so far.
Yeah, so there was a question about how we gathered the data that was on the slide, and I'd mentioned that it came from many sources, but primarily from 2 databases, and there were 2 sort of custom databases. We're in the process right now of developing a new management information system, and hopefully we'll be able to track everything across the whole organization through one system going forward.
And Lisa, I know you've been responding to a few questions in the session just on your own keyboard. Are there any that you'd like to offer an open response on some that you've answered already?
You know, I think I'll just comment on the diversity and inclusion, anti-racism statements that people are saying. you know,
Absolutely.
I'm seeing really good stuff there, and you know, it does seem that I guess we have a similar mind of the other people that are making these statements, and that there's an element of recognizing people, right? Like that you see what's going on. When we asked an elder for guidance on our land acknowledgement, it was past, present, and future. So what's happened in the past, what is happening now, and what can we do in the future? And we also really, the present includes awesomeness in terms of the agency of the people that we want to do good work with, right? And so, so we want the present and the future to include that excellent work that people are doing out in the grassroots. And so I think people are really just saying, so acknowledging what's happened in the past, acknowledging what's happening in the present, and then really committing to what the action is in the future. And I see that reflected in some of these statements here, that we do hear a lot of lip service, right? About, you know, can you go beyond a land acknowledgement? And so I do see some commitment here. That's great. And so I commend you on that work. Thanks.
All right, and I just want to respond to a couple of the questions in the chat. One was about the most helpful statistical markers that we use in terms of measuring poverty. Yeah, so we rely on Stats Can data, and so looking at the proportion of people from different demographic groups in our community that are living in poverty. So how much more at risk are various groups of living in poverty compared to the general population? The other piece that is also helpful is also looking at the depth of poverty. And so some communities are more impacted in that way and have a much longer road to travel in terms of being able to get out of poverty. Yeah, but you're right. There's a lot to be desired in terms of the stats that are available to us. One thing that I'm really interested in, where there isn't really good data, is looking at the assets that people have, particularly liquid assets. And that's another way of looking at the lack of equity and the poverty that people are experiencing. Mm-hmm. And then there's also a question of how we measure change of behavior after money management course. And so the main way that we do that is through pre and post. So at the beginning of a series, we will ask a set of questions, and at the end of the series, we'll ask the same set of questions and compare. And we've seen statistically significant changes in both behaviors and attitudes and confidence and people's knowledge. The one thing that isn't as clear is how durable those changes are over time without other interventions.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Louise and Lisa. I wish we didn't have to end this session because it feels like we're just getting started, but I think you have one final question back for our listeners on key takeaways from today. So we'd love to hear from everyone. Maybe you're just thinking about this right now. Maybe it's something that you'll continue to do thought work on as you go about the rest of your day. But if you'd like to volunteer, again, in the question box, and if Lisa or Louise, if you'd like to offer any visibility to the answers that come in for key takeaways, please let us know what's come in, what is lighting up for you in the answers.
Everyone's super quiet. I'm not seeing anything. Nobody learned anything.
Maybe everyone's thinking. Well, I can tell you.
Okay, I can see some. That's I guess
you're coming in now. Okay, good.
So there is so much more that we can be doing. I love the Train the Trainer program. Importance of tracking data and tracking data to show change. And then the emphasis on relationship building in the work. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, Joanne, because that's something that I really wanted to emphasize. As important as the hard skills and attributes that staff bring to our work, part of the strength of diversity and inclusion is the relationships, like the multiple amazing community relationships that people bring, and how that strengthens the credibility of our organization that we have those folks on staff, and our ability to partner with other organizations, because there's already a lot of trust there, and that makes a huge difference.
Wonderful.
Then, yeah.
Oh, sorry. One more?
No, I'm done. I'm done.
Oh, no, I sincerely wish we didn't have to wrap this up. Genuinely, the time has gone by very fast, and I mean that in the best way. So I want to thank everyone for joining us with your thoughts, your knowledge, sharing your practices with us as we listen to all the great work that SEED has done. And we do want to remind you that we'll be sending out all the materials from today. So if there's something that you didn't get as much time with or you want to go back to, we'll make sure you get all the materials from today's session in an email later. And you can also find them within the next couple of days on our ABLE Financial Empowerment virtual series page for this session and all of the other sessions that have come in this series. We want to make sure you have access to everything. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and most especially I want to thank Louise and Lisa for sharing just the tip of the iceberg of your knowledge and practice with us. It's been so valuable, and we hope that the work continues well where all of you are in the field, and that as we emerge into the next phase of life post-pandemic, we hope that this is never a better time to continue and advance this work. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to everyone listening in. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks so much for hosting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Louise. We hope your day is wonderful, and this has just been such a valuable session. So thanks, everyone. Have a good one.